Wow, I am so sorry. So let's start over, guys.
Sure.
Justin Shelley here, CEO and president of Master Computing, and I don't know how to work a damn computer. So, um, Sia and I have been talking and chatting it up and presenting, and then I realized that I did not start the presentation. So, and that's why I do this. I'm going to say again, everybody that's on with us today, if you can hear, please punch into the chat or the question field that you can hear us and see us. I asked that a minute ago and nobody responded, which is why I started looking around. I've got people on, but I don't think anybody was hearing us or seeing us. So please, guys, help me out here and let me know you can hear us. All right, I've got one person that can hear, and I'm assuming you only now started hearing us, even though we've been talking for a few minutes now.
You know what,
So,
Justin? I talk about myself all the time. We'll just take two. It's all good.
someone asked if I was going to edit out the swear words. No, I swear. I apologize, guys, but I do. I don't edit my. So, anyways, let's go back to the beginning. My name is Justin. I attempt to run a technology firm here in the Dallas Metro, and I'll be honest, my tech guys do the tech work. I do the sales and marketing, and apparently I need to have an engineer sitting beside me while we're doing these live events. Um, we do cybersecurity. That's our main focus here in the Dallas Metro. We have businesses, our clients are anywhere from, a dozen to maybe 100 end users, computers within the organization. We do law firms, whatever. So that's kind of what we do in the technology world. Sia and I met on our first webinar that we did a couple weeks back, and I am absolutely in love with what she does because I've been wanting to start my own podcast for a while, and so that is her specialty. Since we've already eaten up 10 minutes, I'm going to stop there. Sia, will you go ahead and introduce yourself again and then jump back into your presentation?
No worries, no worries. And by all means, I'm very conversational. So Justin, I might be lobbing things your way too. But I hate the proper talk at type presentations. I'm just not that kind of person. So if you do have anyone that is asking questions or wants to interject, by all means, please just cut me off and we can go from there. Bottom line is I can present something all day long, and if it's not relevant to your audience, it's going to be a waste of time for everyone. So just cut me off. I'm cool with that. But everyone, hi, I'm Sia Yasso Tonrat. I'm the co-founder of Innovation Media Enterprises. I too have a background in tech sales, last 20 odd years, worked for a network security company called SonicWall, as well as Hewlett Packard Enterprise. One of the biggest things I've noticed working for both large and small organizations and supporting both small and large organizations is the communication. And as a sales professional, particularly now with this whole pandemic and we're stuck at home, I've never been more sensitive to the fact that different mediums is going to rise as we compete for time and attention with our clients. So you guys, I'm going to kick this off with it's time. Podcasts for businesses are the digital norm. Are we ready to learn about podcasting? Yes and no?
Yes.
Justin?
Yes.
Okay. So, Innovation Media Enterprises, I am a podcast strategist and a production firm. We do marketing specifically around podcasting. We augment marketing organizations, marketing agencies as well. So, if you're kind of curious as to where we sit, but I also have my own podcast. It is called Innovation Calling, and it is centered around emerging technology and business, where we highlight innovative companies. So, I too understand what it feels like to have a podcast for your business. And so, with that said, let's kick it off. So, I had mentioned that. Oh dear, why is it not working? There we go. So I had mentioned in our discussion outline here, I'm going to talk about four major topics and themes. One of which is, the elephant in the room with COVID-19. Has a profound effect on our digital marketing strategies. If you have one or don't have one, we're going to talk about it. We're also going to talk about how podcasts are the new norm for marketing, how other businesses are embracing it, and what it is and what it isn't. And then what podcasts will do for you and your business. And then, of course, that's great. I'm talking about the what, the how, the why, and there's always the execution part of it. So I do give homework throughout. So I want you to think about it. I want you to take notes, and I want you to agree or disagree with me. I love it. So let's kick this off. everyone, whether we love it or not, we're in it or we're heading into a recession. So what does this mean to you? Okay, we're talking about different industries that you're in, marketplaces, whether you're a global enterprise, if you are more regional and localized business, everyone is profoundly affected by this. There is no one that is going to get away with it without some scar wounds. And the question is how do you pivot yourself in a way that you can change lanes, whether it's drastically or slightly, to be able to weather the storm here. Okay. So this is my little shock and awe, like, it's doomsday, but it really doesn't necessarily have to be this way. The fact that you guys are on this call with us right now means business is still happening. It just means our communication for business is going to have to evolve around that. Right. So my question is let's go with COVID-19. I'd like to challenge you. How many of you guys have a digital marketing strategy already in place? And I guess I can't see if you're responding or not, but you can just answer to yourself yes or no these questions, right? If you have a marketing strategy campaign in place, for example, what is your position on it? Is it something that is going to be relevant with this pandemic, or is that message no longer relevant or needed or accepted? Sometimes our marketing campaigns may actually become offensive. So just be very aware of what you're doing right now. And for some, maybe it's double down, right? So if you're in the, let's say, restaurant industry, you're probably not going to be pushing for dining in experience, right? You're not going to want to, let's say, and I'm just picking out a company, Chuck E. Cheese, you're not going to be upselling the party on location for your child's birthday, but perhaps maybe that takeout, that delivery, et cetera, to say, hey, take Chuck E. Cheese home with you, that might be an ad campaign that would be a little bit more resonating to what's going on and more sensitive to all of our sensibilities right now. Pull back. There's an ad that I saw where it was a furniture company where they were targeting, homeowners on certain furniture pieces. I thought it was kind of tongue in cheek where they're talking about mattresses and everyone's staying at home anyway. I don't know. The message may or may not have resonated right now. Who knows if it's essential, right? So you have to figure out what's your position. Do you need to pull back? Do you need to double down? And also, again, what is appropriate and what isn't? The other thing is should you reallocate your marketing budgets? Do you have a marketing budget in place? Most businesses will allocate anywhere from 10 to 30% of their marketing budget for the purpose of either prospecting, brand loyalty, maintenance of your clients, and targeted campaigns. Now, if you are, let's say, losing half of your revenue, that's going to mean the cost of doing business for you to actually turn and close your deal is going to double. And that's what's scary for a lot of business owners right now is what's the cost of doing business? Am I going to be going bankrupt if I maintain my same marketing budgets? And we fully understand that. And so perhaps maybe now COVID-19 is forcing organizations to re-swizzle how much money they really can allocate and what they what buckets they decide to put their marketing dollars towards.
See, let me jump in real quick with an audience question, and I think this is a pretty good one. I guess there's no bad questions, so I just lied about whatever. So many people's marketing strategies seem to be to give stuff away for free. How is that sustainable?
Okay, so that's a funny thing is, okay, whenever you're doing any kind of targeted marketing, you really got to understand what your goal and objective is. If you're looking to give things away, okay, understand psychologically speaking, and maybe this is just anecdotal, but I see it more often than not, there is a weird perception that when you give something away for free, you're somehow negating the value of whatever that product service might be. However, if you message it in a way that is, let's say, hey, since we're talking about podcasting, there's a lot of podcasting hosting platforms or tools like, Squadcast, Zencaster, et cetera, that are offering free trial services so they can learn about their product. And so when the pandemic ends or when we get out of curfew, their goal is to say, look, you've used our product, you liked it, now are you willing to pay for it? And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It just depends on how you go about it. If you're saying, I'm going to give you, I don't know, gosh, something for free. I'm going to give you free teddy bears if you buy this product. I don't know what that stickiness factor is, but if it's something like that example I just gave, where you've got these applications, these tools, these teleconferencing applications that are willing to give time and their own bandwidth and their own software, such that you actually start loving them, that creates that stickiness, that brand awareness and loyalty that does translate well into future campaigns and future revenue. So you got to be very careful of what your free offering is. And that's my 2 cents on that. Does that answer the question?
We'll see if he responds, if that answers the question. I can tell you that we've struggled with that. We've gone back and forth on that as many times as I could possibly. I can't count them, right? Last year, our whole marketing strategy was to do a free cybersecurity toolkit that we gave away to people. I can tell you that the outcome wasn't what we expected, but it was still a good outcome. It became a really good way for us to connect with people, to build our marketing list. And where I thought we would sell on the back end of that, we actually ended up selling completely differently. But the strategy itself still worked.
And I think that's where you have to resizzle what your goals and your KPIs are, which you initially set them out to be may not necessarily be. And that goes back to data analytics, right? So maybe your target audience is that's not the pain point that you thought they had, may not necessarily be what it actually is, right? And that's, I mean, on our podcast we just released was talking about understanding the data that's presented to us and how our own bias actually will shape how we view the results of that data. But now you know how, but you knew to pivot, right? So you offer the same product, now it's messaged and marketed differently. Right. So yeah, I'd love to keep talking about it, but we'll just keep on moving on for the sake of time here. So reallocate your marketing budget and figure out exactly what bucket's going to go to. SEO is more important than ever. For those that have that digital strategy in place, you do need SEO in place because everyone's online. Now, we're not saying to just bombard your website with buzzwords and whatnot. It's got to make sense. Google, for example, they change their algorithms all the time, and they actually look at your website and the contents around it. And if you're using buzzwords just to throw up a dictionary of words, it's not going to work well for you. The way that SEO has been positive or has helped SEO for you and your company are podcasts. Largely because when you do a podcast, you will often have a landing page and you can do a transcription of your podcast. So if you are using buzzwords in the course of your conversation, that does naturally flow. It's not just simply a, throw it against the wall and see what sticks. It's actually a conversation. It's actually in sentence format that the Google algorithm, depending on how many times they change it, but it will be more inclined to see it and pull that so you have better landing page hits. So other thing too here is, do you have a social media strategy or presence? This one, I don't know why I put at the very bottom. I probably should put it at the very top. This day and age, everyone, I know not everyone loves social media. You don't have to have one for your personal profile, but you definitely need one for your business. I cannot express to you how important it is that people look for you on social media over just going to your website. I think websites to me have become more of a reference material. It is a validation of, hey, I like Master Computer. I'm going to go check them out. Oh, here's their website. But they probably discovered you on social media in some capacity. So figure out if you have one, and if you don't, you need to start and think about exactly how you want to execute on that. So that being said, with all the marketing that I just talked about, now is not the time to be a sales pitchy person, okay? It's time for humanity, not an onslaught of promotional emails, ads, whatever, okay? What do I mean by that? Because if you're looking to grow your business and you can't pitch people, what are you talking about? And this is where and why I believe the podcast medium is going to be a great mechanism and tool that is unobtrusive, but a way to still put your message out without being too obvious about it. All right. So let's look at the traditional forms of communication today. Email, right? Phone calls. Yes, of course. Snail mail. I'm actually getting snail mail again, which is very interesting. Webinars. We're on one right now. Conference calls. Obviously, if you want to do a group call or a live Zoom call or something like that, or a Skype call or an HPE My Room call. Ads. Are you deciding to invest onto print media or online banner ads, for example? And then, of course, are you communicating over social media, depending on the different types of platforms that are out there? When I say social media, it could be anything and everything like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, and we'll talk about that in a second. So I laugh at this, but when I was building up this slide, how are you communicating? And I listed all the different ways. I had to be snarky and say, guys, and so is everyone else, right? So if everyone is doing these things that I'm talking about, how do you stand out? How can you compare yourself against your competitors or be discoverable, right? For prospects who may or may not know who you are. So how do you get that level of effectiveness? In the past, we were able to congregate in a room. We could all talk to each other. We could say, here's how we can brainstorm, a lot of synergy, a lot of energy and all that good stuff. Well, the picture below is really now your audience, right? And not only are you not able to touch, oh, I don't, wait, scratch that. I didn't mean it that way, but see each other, in person, right? You can see me talking right now and you can get a sense of my personality, but it's so vastly different when you're in person, right? Maybe you could hear my snarky attitude a little bit better when it's face to face, or you can see the slight twitch in my face. But the bottom line is, not only can you not see any of that, the odds are high your clients and prospects are distracted. Now, I'm not implying that children are distractions, but let's be honest, they absolutely are. And it doesn't have to be children necessarily. It could just be simply your room's a mess and that's bothering you. And so therefore your mind starts to drift. And next thing you know, you've lost your client, or your client's lost you rather, because you're no longer 100% focused on one another because there's other things going on, right? So how do you do that? Well, it begins with a podcast, okay? Outside of the emails, by the way, you should be doing everything that I listed above, right? You should be emailing them because that's how you should maintain communication. But how do you do it differently? Let's think about this with a podcast, right? So let's define what a podcast is first and foremost, all right? So a podcast is typically an audio file that is distributed over RSS feed, which is then disseminated across the podcast distribution players, podcast players, catchers, etc. So what does that mean exactly? What I mean is we load up the RSS feed. It goes into iTunes. Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts, Spotify's of the world, and then you as a podcast listener just pull up your Spotify, for example, and then the podcast that you like should be playing up, and you could just listen to it at your own time, at your own convenience, and download it whenever you want or stream it whenever you want. I'm hearing this more often than not, but what about video? If you're here and you've seen me or heard me before, oftentimes you'll see me do these wildly awkward videos on LinkedIn, okay? I hear a lot of people telling me, "See, I love your video. I love your podcast." I just want to clarify the difference between what I just said, a traditional podcast is the distribution point, right? So there are video podcasts that are out there, okay? But mostly are dependent on a single platform, okay, to disseminate that video feed itself, the MP4, all right? That's like YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, for example, right? What you're hearing oftentimes is people will record over video and it's an MP4 format, and then it will strip it down to an MP3. MP3 is the
Audio?
file, yeah, the audio file that loads into to create your RSS feed. Okay, and that then gets pushed out. So basically you're creating the same content, but it's getting distributed differently. Okay, so Absolutely, there are video podcasts out there. I just want to be clear on the way it gets disseminated out, because you're going to want to think about that for your own business. Do you want everyone to go to a LinkedIn video, Facebook, or YouTube channel, or do you want it to go to them via, again, the Spotify's, iTunes, the Google podcast players, etc.? It's totally two different mechanisms, two different deliveries, but they all have their own benefits. Any questions on that before we go on?
There aren't any in the chat right now. Guys, if you have questions, please go ahead and plug them in there.
Okay. So for those that say to me, okay, great, Sia, I don't listen to podcasts, or my kids listen to podcasts, or really, do people want to listen to podcasts for business? Absolutely, they do. So here are some stats that we got. It just recently was released. This is from the Edison Research. They are one of the most preeminent okay, I can't use the word. They put out a report every year on the state of podcasting and audio for the industry, for media. So something to think about, you guys. We're in business, right? The boomers are going to start to retire. Gen X is starting to age out. Guess who are the next biggest thing for our business, right? Population. It's going to be Gen Z and millennials. 49% of the U.S. population that of Generation Z and millennials, 49% of them listen to podcasts. Now, I put that one up there because that is our future, and that is going to be your future target market. Let me reiterate, millennials are starting to hit 40 next year. So these are not the little 20-year-olds that we used to make fun of all the time, or at least I did. Gen Z's now entering their early 20s. Okay, they're now entering the workforce, and we cannot discredit or assume that they don't have value add. They're actually, their money is going to go much further than ours over the course in time. 75% of the overall US population is familiar with podcasting. 75%, okay? That is huge amount. That means you've got recognition. And of those, that 75% that is aware, 55% of the US population actively listens to podcasts today. Year over 2019, it was a little over 51% last year. So it is growing very steadily. It had a big spike up in, I think, 2017 timeframe, and it is continuing to grow. And it will, I believe, I'm going to put my stamp on it, after this pandemic, podcasting will explode, largely because we're so focused on digital medium right now to communicate as well as to be entertained. This I thought was an interesting stat here, you guys, is 6 minutes and 39 seconds is the average time that those that listen to podcasts will listen to a particular audio. That doesn't feel like a lot of time, but if you think about it, there are a lot of podcasts that are very short format, like under 3 minutes, and then there are the very long formats. For those that are familiar, Joe Rogan is a personal favorite of mine. That man goes on for hours. So again, there's a lot of skew on there, but it's still 6 minutes of time is a huge amount of time if you're a business.
See, let me throw something, and we've got Joseph on with us today, who had the same question I was going to ask you. This 6 minute time frame, we've seen the trend with videos getting shorter and shorter. Podcasts still seem to go, and I get annoyed with it, honestly, because I'll listen to podcasts, but they're an hour, 2 hours long. I don't have the time span for that or the time availability. So are podcasts then also going to trend towards these smaller, maybe a micro podcast, or what do you think is going to happen there?
So that's really interesting. I think it really depends on the content, okay? And it depends on your audience. For business, I would suggest shorter, typically less than 15 minutes, because that's usually the average drive time that someone can focus and listen to. Podcasts on the business, your audience, your target market is typically listening to podcasts in commute. So there has been some interesting comments from the podcast community that there was an initial dip after we were told that we were quarantined. So a lot of the audience wasn't listening because they weren't in their car. Well, it's bounced back up because now that everyone's kind of settling into a routine, they are missing that content. So it is going back up, and now it's moving away from a mobility-based audience to now they're just listening because they really just want to listen to that content regardless of what they're doing.
Okay.
So it is, and the other thing too, if you're a business and you want to be like GE, where they created a fictional podcast that actually went on for 45 minutes or so and people still listened, and GE is considered the bellwether of the podcast for businesses. So just depends on your content.
Interesting. Okay.
And then 6, the number of podcasts that's listened to per week, you guys, it's 6. And I don't have the stats on this, but I'd be really curious to see what that blend looks like. You're going to see a lot of business people listen to some of the, like the crime podcast, for example, but there's a lot that listen to business only because that's their task at hand. And so I'd be really intrigued to see what that mix is of entertainment versus business. But I find, and I've based on, again, this is more anecdotal, I find that business-based podcast listeners tend to focus on business.
Okay.
For the majority.
Right.
So, yes, I talked about the state of podcasting. You can't do podcasting without pushing it out over social media, right? This is how you find your followers. This is how you build that community that we're talking about. So, of the social media influence, again, this is a result of the Edison research for 2020. 80% of the population uses social media. Again, business leaders and salespeople, if you do not have a social media presence, I highly suggest you get one down now. Create a Facebook page if you need to, for example. If you notice these logos, I made Facebook the biggest. It is still the biggest main social media application that's out there that most people go to. However, I'm going to have to say it with asterisks. The Gen Zs and millennials are actually shifting it a little bit. Instagram is fast coming up, and actually TikTok has made a very strong entrance to the market. And that's a very different beast right now. I don't want to go into too much, but just be aware Facebook is still very viable. And I highly suggest you guys look at leveraging Facebook tools available to you to build that community that podcast is going to help you generate. So I added LinkedIn in here, and it is actually the 6th most popular for business purposes. That's my predominant social media posting location, and that's where I get a lot of my following is through LinkedIn because all my podcasts are based on business type focus. So you guys know your audience better than anybody else. If you are a hospitality business owner, you might want to look at something that's more on entertainment or something like Facebook where it's more of a social cultural audience that would be interested in your content, whatever it might be. Or you could be a security company and you create a network security drama show. Maybe Facebook and Insta might be the more appropriate route. You guys have to figure that out. You know your audience better than anyone else. So let's look at podcasts for your business. Okay. These are the questions that you should be asking yourself if you want to launch a podcast and how you can get started on it, because I think a lot of folks don't know exactly where that starting platform is. So first and foremost, what's your industry? Okay. Again, oil and gas industry is not going to have the same type of podcast content as healthcare, right? Who are your competitors? You know who your competitors are or your perceived competitors, right? That you want to compete against, right? And have you looked at their social media presence and their marketing? Okay. If you have knowledge of what they're doing, write down what you like and don't like about it, right? What are you doing in your own social media and marketing strategies? And compare it, right? No, I'm not saying compare it and I say compare it in the context of educating yourself of what you really like. It helps develop your core foundation as you establish a podcast for your business, right? So, obvious questions. Do they have a podcast? If so, what do you like, don't like about it? Listen to it. And also, take note, is their podcast tied directly to the brand or is it tied to a personality? So I think you should consider when you're looking at launching your podcast, is it your own personality that's going to generate the messaging for your business, or is it you want to lead forward with the business? I know of some great security guys who work for major Fortune 100 companies that launched a podcast as chief security folks, but it's really them up front and center with their expertise, and they kind of downplay the fact that they work at a major corporation. And certain individuals have gotten so big that their company actually kind of pulled it in to make it more aligned with the corporate branding. But you need to figure out if your personality person becomes super popular, is it something where your company can embrace it, or is it something where they outlive your own branding? So think about that if you're going to have
conflict of interest, right? With some organization.
Somewhat. So we'll depend. Again, it kind of depends on the content. It goes back to You know, if you're an authority in network security, let's talk about that because that's something that you and I have something in common, Justin, is if it's network security and you start bashing other competitors, I mean, you have to fully disclose that you are representing this particular entity, right? But if you don't want to, then you might want to separate it out, right? Or get the policy of your corporate. And that's the other thing, as a business, write down your social media policy if you don't have that already in place.
Right.
With that being said, what do you ultimately want from your podcast, right? So think about the benefits of what you can and what you can get out of it. And this is very important, you guys. You need to know why you're doing this because your benefits are going to be adjustment according to it, right? All of it can be all of these bullet points I'm saying you can benefit from, but sometimes there's usually one bullet point that's more important than the other. So grow brand awareness. Who are you? What's your name? I mean, if I didn't know about you before, how am I going to find you now, right? Create loyalty and rabid fans. This is why I love podcasts so much, because once you develop a following, it's interesting to see how people interact with one another across Twitter, for example. If someone doesn't like your episode and they want to Twitter troll you, you'd be surprised how many people that are supportive of you jump to your defense. And that's all about building that community and facilitating a following such that when this pandemic ends, it should be status quo. This podcast will continue on. And then now when you start looking at doing things like live events and you leverage your podcast, now you can actually bring that community of people who listen to your podcast who may or may not would have gone to any other events of yours before. Differentiate yourself. When I asked you, look at your competitors. Are they doing a podcast? If they're not, it's open season, you guys. No one else is doing it. Why aren't you then? Why don't you be that first person? A lot of times, and everyone that has a product that they or service they sell, they know all too well. Oftentimes, it's first to market. So be the first to podcast. It's okay if it's not pretty. No one has a pretty first time experience when they ride the bike. Most time you fall on your face and you scratch yourself, right? Everyone expects your first few podcasts aren't going to be beautiful, and that's okay. Just get on the bike and you'll learn how to ride your bike. Same thing with podcasting. Just get on there and you'll get better over time. I promise you. Also, in this time of the pandemic, remember I was talking about, think about, your messaging. Are you really trying to sell something at this point in time? Be more than just a sales guy. Be more than saying, hey, I've got a story, or I've got a product for you. Why don't you talk about, I got a story for you, right? Make it human. Be human in your interaction here. It's not just about network security. Okay, we understand we need it. But let's talk about maybe your podcast to be about Zoom, right? They've got a lot of issues right now around the security around their application. We're not knocking Zoom by any stretch of the imagination. We're just having a conversation about it. And then maybe how does that apply to your own business? If there is a potential that your telecommunication application software that you're using, can it penetrate your own network, right? Are you allowing your web servers to be wide open because you're allowing an application to come in and infect your entire network, right? Those are great conversations to have that I would find very interesting. If I'm a business owner, I don't want to lose all of my IP because I didn't think about doing due diligence because I want to load TikTok onto the network. We'll talk about TikTok at another time, but it's all about the benefits for your business. It'll grow your brand awareness. You'll create that loyalty and rabid fans I was telling you about. It builds that community in the end, right? Whether you start like a Facebook page, as I had mentioned before, a lot of interaction going on there. You can pose questions where people start talking back and forth that they might not necessarily have thought to, contribute to before. And I've noticed, by the way, uptick, and I haven't got the numbers straight from Facebook, but I just seen it in my own, is because we're stuck at home, a lot of people are on social media and they are gabbing away. So check it out. Maybe that makes best sense for you. So, okay, great. Any questions on that? Because I can't tell you the value of the podcast. I didn't go into specific formats because I'd imagine if you'd like to know more, you'll do the research or you can talk to me about it. But any questions so far?
No. Well, let's see. Did something just come in? How do you work with people on their content?
Oh, easy. Sit back and give them a beer or soda and see how they tell me about their business and what they're looking for, what problems do they solve, and who's their client. Your personality starts to show through. And that's the first thing I do. Maybe it's because I try to be more intuitive on whoing my knowing my clients a little bit. But it's all about establishing your strategy. Okay. Don't You can just wing it. Okay. But first and foremost, as part of your content, as you look at developing what you're going to talk about, it could be a bunch of different formats. Okay. If you want to make it conversational and fun, it could be a standalone. If you want to make it like a narrative style, then you're definitely going to have to story arc it. Okay. If you're not sure you can sustain a weekly or a bi-weekly podcast, then maybe you should consider what we call seasons, right? So if you say from the get-go, we're going to do an 8-episode discussion on privacy, then it's much easier to nail down your 8 topics that you'd like to talk about for privacy. But really, it has to go back to, again, what are your goals on this? Okay. You can put anything out there, but if it doesn't help you march towards what your objectives and goals are, then you're just throwing stuff out there. So you have to write that down. What are your key performance indicators? So if you're looking to grow brand awareness, right? Put your podcast front and center, give it a dedicated landing page. Don't tuck it under blog. Make sure people understand that you have a podcast so it increases traffic to your website, for example. So if increase in traffic is part of your KPI, then make sure you supplement in a way that the podcast isn't doomed for failure. The why. That's probably the biggest one, is why are you even doing this? Make sure you're doing it because you want to do it, not because you have to do it. Make sure your why is because you think there's some valuable information that you can share, or if you want to do interview format, that you could pull great information from your guests. Perhaps your why is maybe the more guests you have, you're expanding your network by getting them onto your own show where they will then push it out to promote with their own network. Figure out why you're doing this. I usually,
yeah, there's a question that kind of ties into that, which I'd like to talk about. Do you believe that everyone has content, or are there people and industries that are too boring?
no, there is a lock for every key, kids.
Let me throw one thing out there on this subject, because in the IT world, I can tell you that this comes up a lot. And in our industry, there's a ton of burnout. Our stuff isn't always super exciting. And when we're talking about marketing our products and services, I can't tell you how many times I've heard IT business owners, myself included, where we say, nobody wants to hear this. It's boring. We do it night and day. It's all we do. It's all we think about. And we are bored with our own content. So maybe I'm putting words in Joseph's mouth here, but I believe that I become bored with my content long before the audience would. Go ahead. What do you think about that?
Okay. Podcasts are not ads, people. First and foremost, you want to talk speeds and feeds? That's what your marketing department, they've already done the white papers. They've already done the PowerPoint presentations. They've already done the webinars. If you're going to talk speeds and feeds, do not do a podcast unless you market it as we are the tech guru podcast. We are going to go into the weeds. We're going to talk speeds and feeds, and that's what we do. Then you've marketed in a way where the audience is going to be niched. It's going to be a much smaller audience, but you're going to get all the techs who want to hear it. And that also creates that brand loyalty that I was talking about, because now those people know that if they want to go into a tech podcast, you're the go-to. So just because you're niche doesn't mean you don't have an audience. Guy Raz actually said at the Podcast Movement Conference last year, and I love him. He does a podcast, How I Built This, on NPR and other stuff. He said, I would rather talk in a room of 1,000 people who want to listen to me than have 10 million Twitter followers. Because to him, that 1,000 people, they're listening. They understand what he's talking about. They understand his goals, objectives, his why, and they will be there the next week. or the whatever frequency of time that you do your podcast. Those 10 million tweeters, they're there for a tweet, and they may never listen to your content. And is that really a value to you as a business? Right? So I caution you on content is king, but you got to be very clear on it. It's not an ad, but if you're going to talk speeds and feeds from a tech standpoint, then you own it. The other thing too to think about, you guys, you talk to your clients. How many times have you gone home and told your spouse a story of, can I say SHIT show that happened that day because someone decided to unplug a server out of the blue, right? Someone that's inexperienced. Like, there are such silly stories out there that you can tell where it's going to highlight a business challenge that you're trying to achieve for a client or whatever. But you could do anecdotes, tell stories, you guys. We all have stories, right? And if you don't, then ask some friends. They can give you stories. What about that Zoom video that went viral where that poor girl went to the bathroom, right? That's a story, a Zoom story. It's not selling you Zoom and the speeds and feeds around Zoom, but it's telling you what Zoom's capable of, right? And people want to hear that. They want to hear the human element. They want to hear the emotions around it. So, I mean, there's a lot to establish with your strategy, but I call that the backbone of your podcast. The production, easiest part of it, you guys. Grab your cell phone or grab your laptop, record it on a Zoom platform or something. If you want more details, there's hardware you can buy, like this mic, for example, or you can just do it over your headset. Just depends on the quality. The better the microphone and hardware, obviously, the better the quality of your recording. But sometimes there's something very natural about the roughness of recording outside, right? So production, don't get overly stressed about it. Launch it. That's what I was talking about. You're going to have to launch it through RSS feed, a hosting platform, or if you're going to do video, like I mentioned, YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, launch it out. Sometimes you do have to do extra work to launch it on the Spotifys and the Pandoras of the world, but that's just extra basic operational stuff. But once it's done, it's set it, forget it. Once you load the RSS feed in, it goes out. And don't forget, just because you launch a podcast and you put it out on social media, whatever these platforms are, don't do it once and think everyone's going to see it. There is a stat, whereas if you guys remember, it used to take 3 times for someone to remember something in the course of a discussion. In this day and age of social media and bombardment of content, it's now 17 times you have to repeat yourself in order for someone to remember a point. So don't think that your social media posts become redundant. I swear it doesn't, because it sometimes takes 17 times for that one person to say, oh, hey, I didn't know you had an episode out. And it is annoying at times, but it is part of the business and part of engagement that you're just going to have to accept in this day and age for podcasting. So I kind of rushed through the very end of it because I want to leave room for Q&A. I'm CEO with Innovation Media Enterprises. You can see me here at innovationmediaenterprises.com. My contact info, I am posting almost daily on LinkedIn. I have random thoughts. I love to hear people tell me what they think, whether they agree or disagree. That could also be part of your podcast strategy, is doing supplemental things like a LinkedIn video. I do post it on Facebook as well, different type of audience and responses, but it works, you guys. It absolutely works. Just a side note, our podcast was never meant to be a monetized podcast, but we do monetize it through our live, well, not now, but our monthly live audience recordings, where we record it in front of a group during a happy hour, for example. And those actually get our most downloads. Our podcast has over 200,000 downloads in the course of the year, and we're a tech and business podcast, which, to your point that you said, Justin, was a, not sexy. People are listening and looking.
Right, right. So a question that came up for me when you were talking about all that is, and this comes back to that beer that you promised me, of how we decide what it is that we want to, what is the message, who's the character, what's the story, the theme, however you word that. We've got another question here. So the podcast is not a marketing or a sales advertisement, but it's part of our marketing sales strategy. should new customer leads come, or new leads and conversions be a part of the KPIs for the podcast? And I think that ties into what I was saying, and maybe they're two completely separate things, but in my opinion, we've got to first decide what is the overall outcome we're trying to achieve, right? And maybe you could just talk about that for a minute with some of your clients. Where do you have a case study or somebody that you've gone through this process with, where maybe the outcome wasn't what they expected going in?
Yeah, so we have one that initially I thought was fascinating. Okay, so their desire to do a podcast in an industry wasn't exactly recognized, wasn't necessarily recognized as being hot and sexy, if you will. Okay, it's technology. Okay, it's a technology client. They thought that by putting this podcast out, they were going to attract a type of audience that was going to embrace their messaging. And what turned out to be was at the time, the feedback that was given was we wanted to make it more entertaining. And the audience came back and said, that's great, but we want it to a little bit more technical, which the example I just gave. And so what they ended up doing was they split it. So there was a more entertaining, more sales focused audience. They were trying to, basically, here's the deal. They were trying to combine sales and tech into one podcast. And for all of you out there like me and Justin, we're salespeople. And sometimes our extroversion doesn't want us to hear about the more mundane things. I don't want to call it speeds and feeds, but the more mundane nuances of the technology. And so it actually ended up having to split between a product management type podcast and marketing and a sales marketing podcast.
Interesting.
So, and that wasn't, neither one of us anticipated. I actually assumed it was going to be something like, hey, let's put out a more amusing type podcast and, you know, people want to listen, right? But it just turned out there people just wanted more drier content from one of the hosts.
Okay, so they split into two separate podcasts, you're saying?
Yes. And the other thing too to think about too is, I know we're thinking external facing. You guys, there are internal podcasts as well. So we've produced, actually more often than not, actually we've produced internal podcasts. So this is a way for the, you know, the corporate heads, if you will, have an ability to communicate across their own company. So whether it is get to know this executive, that was one that we did, where they just basically lined up one executive after another, where they just got to know who they are. And then there was another one where they had their core values, where they said, we are so entrenched in our core values, we need all new hires and all employees to understand they are living by these core tenets. And so we just did a podcast focused on the core tenets, and it was fun. It was a fun project, actually, and it was well received by the employees.
That's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that.
And okay, so you asked me another question I didn't get to, and I didn't write it down, and I apologize. What was that first one that you asked me?
Was it about just coming up with a story?
Yeah. Okay. So when I mentioned earlier, I do look at the people that are asking me to do this podcast. I look at their personalities. Don't be something that you're not. And that's so critical, right? If you are a laid back person and all of a sudden you feel like you need to do like a very, you know, Harvard Business Review type podcast, you're going to fail yourself in the context that your real personality is going to shine through. So you do have to do a little soul searching, and accept, you know, for me, I'm more laid back. So I would not do a HBR type podcast, if that makes sense. And also, you don't have to be the person. Maybe you get someone that you trust to be your podcast host if you're not comfortable. That's the other thing.
Like in kind of an interview setup, or you have somebody else do it just on their own?
Oh, no, like an interview setup, for example. Or, I mean, there's different formats. And I didn't go into too much detail because I didn't want to do a full on. I think we could, you know, email me if you have more questions, but like format, for example, I mentioned there's interview style, there's solo style, there is a narrative, right? There's fictional, style podcast. There's a combination of it all. There's that intertwining of the story plus the interview. I call that the NPR, like, let's tug at your heartstrings. I've seen some real big productions where they make it look and sound like something you'd see from like American Idol, when they try to pull the heartstrings. And I've seen it where some, like Guy Raz, actually, he records his podcast, his segments in a closet, right? So it just depends on, again, the type of vibe and branding that you want for your podcast.
Let me throw another, well, I've got a couple of them. And I might need more clarification on this unless you can decipher it better than I am. Are there good examples of a non-personality hosted or driven podcast? Like, is there always the journalist or host?
So it's not always interview style. So I mentioned, so GE had a podcast, and it's just jumped out of my mouth. That's a narrative style. McAfee has a podcast as well. Their names are eluding me right now, and I'm very sorry. Just look them up and you'll see what I'm talking about. Or I could just email you, Justin, if you want to do a follow-up on it. But it is non-personality driven. It is the podcast itself. Our podcast, Innovation Calling, even though it's my co-host Aaron Greger and I, we're not on the cover of the podcast. It's really about the content and it's about the guest. We just introduce ourselves just so you can differentiate our voices, but it's not the Sia and Aaron show, for example.
Okay. So we're at the top of the hour. I can stay a few minutes longer since we started late. I don't know what your schedule is, Sia. Certainly we've taken up everybody's time for the full hour, but if anybody wants to stay and Sia, you're okay with it, then I can stick around for a minute. On that note though, while those are leaving that need to leave, I am going to send out a follow-up email, and Sia, if you would shoot me all of the contact information that you want me to put into that, I'll get it published. And also one thing that I'm going to start doing is just including a little link to book a free 15-minute consultation. So if you have something like that you'd like to offer, then you can include that link and I'll make sure everybody gets it, so that, sometimes these webinars are great, but they're not very interactive.
It's tough, yeah, especially since I can't see.
Right. So I'll make myself available for a free 15-minute consult. And if you'd like to do the same, then I'll go ahead and throw that out there.
I'd be happy to.
I don't see any other final questions coming in. Are we going to get the presentation? Yes, we do send out a recording to this, so you guys can go back and reference it. I'm just kind of scrolling through these. Somebody asked why in a closet. I'm not sure what that's referencing.
Sound quality.
Oh, are you recording in a closet? Did you say that and I missed it?
I am not. I'm recording in my office. So if you want to do how to do the technical side of the podcast, that's a totally different discussion. But you want some sound dampening, and clothing are perfect.
Interesting. Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, I just caught that question, but I figured I must have missed something in the dialogue because I'm watching you and I'm watching the question feed as well. So anyways, well, guys, that said, let's go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you, Sia, so much for being with me today. And thank you all for joining us. And we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Watch for the email. If you have any questions, go ahead and ping us offline. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thank you, Justin.
You bet. Thank you.